You know that feeling when you're about to do something sweet for someone you love? That little flutter in your chest? That's exactly what I felt that Tuesday afternoon, standing outside Carson's office building in Midtown, holding his favorite pastrami sandwich from Katz's and a slice of cheesecake I'd driven 20 minutes out of my way to get. 23 years of marriage. 23 years of packing his lunches, ironing his shirts, raising our 2 kids while he climbed that corporate ladder. And I was still the wife who showed up with surprise lunches because I thought, God, I don't even know what I thought anymore. I was smiling when I walked through those glass doors, actually smiling. The security guard, older guy, maybe mid-60s, the kind with kind eyes, looked up from his desk and did a double take when he saw me. "Can I help you, ma'am? I'm here to see Carson Mitchell. I'm his wife?" He cut me off, and something in his voice made my stomach drop. "Just a little. Just enough." "Yes," I said slowly. He tilted his head, studying me with this look I couldn't quite read. Confusion? Pity? "Are you his wife, or the other one?" The bag slipped from my fingers. The sound of the container hitting the marble floor echoed through that pristine lobby like a gunshot. "Excuse me?" He shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in his computer screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Mr. Mitchell's wife just went upstairs about 10 minutes ago. Should I call her down?" The world tilted. "What are you talking about?" My voice came out strangled, foreign. "I'm Isabella Mitchell. I've been his wife for 23 years. 23 years. The elevator dinged behind me. I turned. And that's when I saw her. She couldn't have been older than 32. Tall. Gorgeous in that effortless way that made my throat close up, the kind of woman who probably woke up looking like she'd just stepped out of a salon. She was wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my car payment, her hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders. And she was holding Carson's navy blazer, the one with the small coffee stain on the left cuff that I'd been trying to get out for 3 weeks. She had her phone pressed to her ear, and she was laughing. That intimate, throaty laugh that women only use with men they're sleeping with. "Honey, I'm heading out now," she purred into the phone, her voice dripping with affection that made my skin crawl. "Everything is ready for tonight. Your first wife will never know." First wife. Those 2 words hit me like a freight train. I ducked behind a marble pillar, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. My hands were shaking. Everything was shaking. She kept talking, completely oblivious to me standing 15 feet away, crumbling from the inside out. "I picked up your favorite wine, yes, the Bordeaux, and I stopped by Tiffany's. You're going to love what I got for the apartment." She paused, listening, then laughed again. "Stop it. You're terrible. I'll see you at 7. I love you too. I love you too." She ended the call and glided toward the exit, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in her wake. The same perfume I'd smelled on Carson's collar 3 months ago. The same one he'd told me was from a colleague who'd hugged him goodbye at a retirement party. The security guard was staring at me now, his face pale. "Ma'am, I held up my hand. I couldn't speak. If I opened my mouth, I would scream or vomit or both. I stumbled out of that building, leaving the sandwich and cheesecake smashed on the floor. I sat in my car in that parking garage for 47 minutes. I know, because I watched every single minute tick by on the dashboard clock, trying to remember how to breathe. My phone buzzed. A text from Carson. "Working late tonight, babe. Don't wait up. Love you." And that's when something inside me didn't break. It crystallized, hardened, turned into something cold and sharp and unforgiving. Because I suddenly understood with perfect clarity that this wasn't new, this wasn't a mistake. This was a whole separate life he'd built while I'd been home folding his underwear and making sure his mother's birthday card got mailed on time. First wife. Which meant, somewhere in this city, in some apartment I'd probably helped pay for with the money I'd scraped together from my part-time bookkeeping job, there was a whole other life. A life with wine and Tiffany's and a woman who got to be the exciting one, the loved one, the chosen one. While I got to be... what? The placeholder? The fool? I started the car. My hands had stopped shaking. And for the first time in 23 years of marriage, I drove home planning something that had nothing to do with anyone else's comfort but my own. That was the moment my marriage died before my eyes even caught up. But Carson? He had no idea the wife he'd been taking for granted was about to become someone he wouldn't recognize. The smell of coffee still does it to me, that bitter, burnt edge you get from a pot that's been sitting too long on the burner. That's what I was smelling in my car that day, from the thermos I'd packed at 5:30 that morning, the same way I'd done every morning for 22 years. 22 years. God, when did that happen? When did I become the woman who could count her marriage in decades? I met Carson when I was 28. He was this big, confident guy working construction, always talking about his dreams, how he was going to have his own company someday, how he was going to build something that mattered, and I loved that about him. I loved his ambition, his drive. What I didn't know then was that I would become that drive. I was working as a nurse at Mount Sinai, pulling double shifts in the ER because that's where the differential pay was. Nights, weekends, holidays didn't matter. Carson needed capital to get his contractor's license. Then he needed money for his first truck. Then his certifications. Then his mother got sick, and someone had to pay those medical bills. That someone was always me. I remember the year I sold my father's apartment in Queens, the only thing he'd left me when he died. It was small, rent-controlled, nothing fancy. But it was mine. My inheritance. My safety net. Carson needed it for his first office space. "Just temporary, Bella," he'd said, using that nickname that used to make me melt. "I'll pay you back triple, I promise." I signed the papers the next day. That was 14 years ago. I'm still waiting for that payback. But I didn't mind. Not really. That's what marriage is, right? Partnership. Building something together. I was investing in us, in our future, in the family we were creating. Except somewhere along the way, us became him, and I became the woman who worked 60-hour weeks so Carson could take clients to steakhouses in Manhattan. I became the woman who ate dinner alone at 10 p.m., reheating whatever I'd meal prepped on Sunday because he was networking. I became invisible. There was this one anniversary, our 15th, I think. I'd planned this whole thing. Made reservations at that Italian place in Little Italy he always talked about. Bought a new dress navy blue because he once said I looked beautiful in blue. I even left work early, which I never did. I sat at that table for 2 hours. He never showed up. When he finally came home at midnight, he'd forgotten entirely. "Babe, I'm so sorry," he'd said, and he looked genuinely apologetic. "Big client meeting ran late." You know how it is? I did know. I always knew. I forgave him. Made him leftover pasta. Told him it was fine, we'd celebrate another time. We never did. But I kept going, kept packing his lunches, kept paying into our joint account while he bought new tools, new equipment, hired more crew. His company grew. Mitchell Construction became a name people recognized. He started wearing expensive watches, driving a truck that cost more than my entire nursing salary. And I was proud. I really was. Because I'd helped build that. Every double shift, every missed holiday, every penny I'd saved, it had gone into making Carson Mitchell successful. I just didn't realize I was building a life that had no room for me in it. If you've ever given everything to someone who later turned away, you'll understand this part. You'll know that specific kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone more than they love you back. From being essential but never quite valued. From building someone's dream while your own gets smaller and smaller until you can't even remember what it looked like anymore. Thank you to everyone who helps keep these stories alive. Every word you share, every act of kindness helps protect those who still believe in family, who still believe sacrifice means something. I want to believe it does. Sitting in that parking garage, staring at Carson's text about working late, I thought about that nurse at Mount Sinai, the 28-year-old version of me who'd fallen in love with a man's potential, who'd believed in partnership and promises. And I thought about that woman in the cream-colored coat, walking out of my husband's office building with his jacket and his "I love you too." The woman who got the wine and the Tiffany's and the apartment I'd probably helped finance without even knowing it. "First wife," she'd said. Like I was a rough draft, a practice run, something to be improved upon and replaced. I started the engine and drove home through rush hour traffic, past all those buildings Carson's company had worked on, past the life we'd supposedly built together. And I realized, I'd been so busy building him, I'd forgotten to build an exit. But I was about to learn. I didn't plan to follow her. I swear I didn't. But when that woman in the cream coat climbed into a black Mercedes and pulled out of the parking garage, my hands turned the wheel on their own, my body moved before my brain could catch up. I stayed 3 cars back, the way they do in movies. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in every breath. She drove 12 blocks and pulled into the underground garage of Carson's office building. The same building I'd just fled from 20 minutes earlier. She had a key card. She waved it at the gate like she owned the place. Maybe she did. I parked across the street, watching through the windshield as she disappeared into the elevator. Then I did something I'd never done in 22 years of marriage. I walked into my husband's office building without announcing myself. The security guard from earlier looked up, his face going pale. "Ma'am, I don't think." "Which floor?" My voice came out flat. "Dead." He hesitated. "Which floor?" 12, he whispered. I took the stairs. All 12 flights. I needed the time. Needed to feel my legs burn. Needed the pain in my chest to come from something physical instead of this gaping wound that was opening wider with every step. The door to Carson's office suite was cracked open. Just slightly. Just enough. I heard her laugh first, that same throaty, intimate sound that had gutted me in the lobby. God, this view never gets old. Her voice was light, playful. I can't wait to wake up to this every morning. Soon, baby, soon. Carson's voice. My husband's voice. But softer than I'd heard it in years. Tender. How soon? A pause, the sound of footsteps. The penthouse is ready, right? You said the penthouse was ready. Penthouse? It's ready, Carson said. I told you, it's been sitting empty for months. Company rental, remember? Nobody's using it. My stomach dropped. The penthouse, the Riverside loft, the property Carson had told me the company was leasing for out-of-town clients. The property that had been in my father's name, the property I'd inherited along with the Queen's apartment, the property Carson had asked me to sign over for tax purposes 3 years ago. I still can't believe she just signed it over to you, Lydia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. God, she must be so stupid. The world tilted. She trusted me, Carson said simply, like it was nothing, like trust was something disposable. Isabella doesn't ask questions, she just does what she's told. Does what she's told. 22 years. 22 years of partnership, and that's what I was to him. Obedient, stupid. When are you filing? Lydia asked. Lawyer said he'd have the divorce papers ready by next week. Clean break. She won't fight it. And the assets? Already moved most of them. The penthouse is in my name, business accounts are separate. She'll get the house in Jersey and whatever's left in the joint checking, maybe 50 grand if she's lucky. $50,000. I'd put over $300,000 into his company over the years. $300,000 of inheritance, savings, overtime pay, everything I'd scraped together, and he was going to give me 50 grand and call it even. What about the Riverside transfer? Lydia's voice dropped. That's the big one, right? The one worth, what did you say, $500,000? Already done. The sound of papers shuffling. Had the documents forged 8 months ago. Transfer of ownership. Riverside loft. From Isabella Hayes to Carson Mitchell. She doesn't even know the property's worth anything. Thinks it's still some rent-controlled dump her dad left her. My knees buckled. I grabbed the doorframe to stay upright. 8 months. He'd been planning this for 8 months. You're terrible, Lydia said, but she was laughing. Actually laughing. I love it. Soon you'll be free of her, and everything she owns will be ours. Everything she owns will be ours. I backed away from the door. 1 step. 2. My vision was swimming. The fluorescent lights overhead were too bright, too sharp, cutting into my skull. I made it to the stairwell before my legs gave out completely. I sat on those cold concrete steps for I don't know how long, trying to remember how to breathe. Trying to understand how the man I'd loved for 22 years, the man I'd built, supported, believed in could refer to me as the old burden. Could steal my inheritance? Could forge documents to take the last thing my father had left me. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that their betrayal made you question your own worth, you're not alone. Thank you to everyone who helps me tell these stories. Your support keeps this space alive for those who still believe that truth, somehow, will always find its way. Because sitting in that stairwell, I made myself a promise. Truth was going to find its way. And I was going to be the one holding the map. It started raining on the drive home. Not the dramatic kind of rain you see in movies, the kind that matches the heartbreak, loud and cleansing. This was that cold, miserable November drizzle that just sits on your windshield and makes everything gray. My phone kept buzzing in the cup holder, Carson's name lighting up the screen over and over. Hey babe, grabbing dinner with the crew, don't wait up. You okay? You're usually home by now. Bella? I turned the phone face down and kept driving. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. I'd forgotten to leave the porch light on that morning, something I'd done every single day for 22 years because Carson hated coming home to a dark house. I left it off. Inside, everything looked the same. The cream-colored couch I'd found on sale at a furniture outlet in Queens. The framed photos on the mantel, our wedding, the kids' graduations, that trip to Cape Cod we took 15 years ago. The kitchen table where I'd eaten dinner alone more nights than I could count. Everything looked the same. But it felt like a stranger's house. I stood in the entryway for I don't know how long, still wearing my coat, still holding my keys, just standing there, listening to the silence. The house is so quiet. Even the walls seem to avoid me. I walked to the bedroom, our bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed where Carson had kissed me goodbye that morning. Where he'd told me he loved me before heading out the door at 6:45 a.m., same as always. Had he been lying then? Or had those words just stopped meaning anything years ago? My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs, trying to make them stop, but they wouldn't. They just kept trembling, like my body knew something my mind was still trying to process. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts. Susan, my college roommate. Hadn't spoken to her in 4 years. I'd missed her daughter's wedding because Carson needed me to cover a work event. Marie from the hospital. Retired last year. We'd promised to get coffee. I never called. Linda, Carson's sister. God. I couldn't call her. She'd probably already known. I hovered my thumb over Susan's name for a full minute before setting the phone down. I had no one. Somewhere along the way, while I was busy building Carson's life, I'd let mine get so small it could fit in the palm of my hand. And even that felt too big to hold on to. My eyes landed on the framed photo on the nightstand. Our 15th anniversary, the one where he'd forgotten. We'd recreated it a week later. Makeup anniversary, we'd called it, laughing. Carson had his arm around me, both of us smiling at the camera in front of some restaurant I can't even remember the name of now. I looked so happy in that photo. I picked it up, stared at that woman, at myself for a long time. Then I opened the frame, pulled out the photo, and tore it in half, slowly, right down the middle. His half went in the trash. Mine I just held for a moment before letting it fall to the floor. I walked through the house room by room, touching things. The coffee maker I'd bought on sale at Target. The dining chairs I'd refinished myself because we couldn't afford new ones when we first moved in. The lamp in the living room, a gift from my mother before she died. Every single item in this house had been bought with my money, my sacrifice, my overtime shifts and skipped lunches and careful budgeting. And he'd taken it all for granted. Worse, he'd taken it all, period. I ended up on the couch, still in my coat, staring at the dark TV screen. Rain tapped against the windows. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere down the street, a car alarm went off and then stopped. How long have I been living with a stranger? I whispered to the empty room. The silence didn't answer. I think I sat there for 3 hours, maybe 4. Time stopped meaning anything. My phone kept buzzing, Carson calling, texting, probably wondering where I was, if dinner was ready, if I'd picked up his dry cleaning. The man who'd called me the old burden. The man who'd forged documents to steal my inheritance. The man who'd built a whole second life while I was at home waiting for him to remember I existed. If you've ever sat in a room so quiet it started to echo your thoughts, you'll understand this silence. Thank you to those who help keep these stories alive. Your kindness helps give voice to people who've been forgotten, who sit alone in their pain, waiting to be seen again. Around 10 p.m., I heard his truck pull into the driveway. I didn't move. The front door opened. His keys hit the bowl on the entry table, the ceramic bowl I'd made in a pottery class I'd taken alone because he'd been too busy to join me. Bella? His voice echoed through the house. Casual, easy, like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't just spent the afternoon planning my erasure with another woman. I sat in the dark and said nothing. And for the first time in 22 years, I didn't get up to greet him. I waited until Carson fell asleep. He'd kissed my forehead that night, actually kissed me and told me he loved me, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't spent the afternoon watching my entire marriage dissolve into lies. I lay there in the dark, listening to him breathe, wondering how many times he'd fallen asleep next to me while planning my erasure. At 2 a.m., I got up. His office was at the end of the hall. The door was never locked. Why would it be? I was trustworthy, obedient, stupid. I turned on the desk lamp and started opening drawers. Bank statements first. Our joint account showed regular withdrawals I'd never made, 500 here, 1,000 there, always under the threshold that would trigger an alert. Always just small enough to be invisible. Except they added up. Over 18 months, he'd siphoned nearly $40,000. My hands were steady as I photographed every page. The filing cabinet was locked, but I knew where he kept the key taped under his desk drawer, the same place he'd kept it for 15 years. Inside, a folder labeled Project Lydia. Project. Like she was a business plan, a construction site, something to be built and finished. The first document was a life insurance policy, $1 million. Primary beneficiary, Isabella Mitchell. Secondary beneficiary, Lydia Chen. I stared at that for a long time. Secondary beneficiary. Meaning if I died, she'd get everything. The next document made my blood run cold. Petition for guardianship and power of attorney. Subject, Isabella Hayes Mitchell. Grounds, declining mental health and incapacity. He was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. There were notes in his handwriting. Forgetful, emotional, erratic behavior, needs supervision. Lies, all lies. But they were documented lies. Dated, detailed, building a case. I photographed everything. At the bottom of the folder, corporate registration documents, Mitchell Chen Development LLC, registered 6 months ago. Partners, Carson Mitchell and Lydia Chen. Collateral listed, Riverside Loft property, valued at $520,000. My inheritance, the property my father died to leave me. They'd used it as collateral for their new company, their new life. The air left my lungs. I sat in that office until dawn, photographing every document, every lie, every piece of my erasure. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 12 years. Marcus Bell. Detective Marcus Bell retired now, but we'd worked together at Mount Sinai when he was recovering from a gunshot wound. I'd been his night nurse. We'd stayed friendly. He answered on the 4th ring. Isabella, it's 6 a.m. Marcus, I need help. Something in my voice made him go quiet. What happened? I told him everything. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then, send me everything you photographed. I'll make some calls. 3 days later, he called back. Isabella, it's worse than you thought. He'd pulled public corporate filings, property records, banking information, everything legal, everything documented. Carson hadn't just stolen my inheritance, he'd leveraged it, borrowed against it, used it to secure loans for his new company with Lydia. If those loans defaulted, I'd lose everything. And the power of attorney petition? He'd already filed it. There was a court date scheduled for 3 weeks from now. If it went through, he'd control everything. My accounts, my assets, my life. And I'd have no say in any of it. Marcus, I whispered. He's trying to erase me. Yeah, Marcus said quietly. He is. If you've ever found truth in the quiet moments after pain, you know what this part feels like. Thank you to everyone who supports these stories. Your kindness keeps hope alive for people still finding their voice after betrayal. I hung up the phone and looked at the evidence spread across my kitchen table. For 22 years, I'd been invisible. But Carson had made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated what an invisible woman could see. And what she could do when she finally decided to be seen. There comes a point when silence stops, meaning defeat, it becomes preparation. I woke up the morning after finding those documents and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. No more tears. No more shaking hands, just a cold, focused calm that settled into my bones like winter frost. I made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table. Watched the morning light filter through the curtains, turning everything golden sharp. Carson was still asleep upstairs. The man who'd called me the old burden. The man who'd forged my signature. The man who was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could legally erase me. I took a sip of coffee and opened my laptop. First stop, the bank. By 9 a.m., I was sitting across from Patricia Chen, the branch manager I'd worked with for 15 years. I slid the photographed documents across her desk. I need to freeze all joint accounts, I said, effective immediately. Patricia's face went pale as she scanned the withdrawal records. Mrs. Mitchell, these signatures aren't mine, I finished. And I'm filing a fraud report. Today. She nodded slowly. I'll need you to fill out some forms. I brought my own lawyer, I said, gesturing to the woman sitting beside me. Rachel Torres, Marcus had recommended her. 58, sharp as broken glass, with a reputation for demolishing men who thought they could steal from their wives. By noon, every joint account was frozen, every credit card canceled, every automatic payment stopped. Carson's company payroll? Inaccessible. His business credit line? Revoked. The power of attorney petition he'd filed? Contested with a mountain of medical records proving I was perfectly competent. Rachel smiled as she packed up her briefcase. He's going to panic. Good, I said. For years, I mistook generosity for love. Now, I'm learning the quiet math of self-respect. The next day, I went to Carson's office building, not to confront him, to hire the cleaning service that worked his floor. Cost me $200 and a sob story about needing to know if my husband was cheating. They placed a voice-activated recorder under his desk during their evening shift. Marcus handled the surveillance. Followed Carson and Lydia for a week. Photographed them entering the penthouse, my penthouse. Documented them at restaurants, hotels, the DMV where Lydia was trying to register a car using the Mitchell Chen LLC business account. Every photograph was dated, time-stamped, legally obtained. Every conversation on that recorder was damning. And at home? I said nothing. I cooked dinner, did laundry, kissed Carson goodbye in the mornings, asked about his day when he came home late. I played the role I'd been playing for 22 years, the good wife, the trusting wife, the stupid wife. Except now, every smile was a weapon. It's funny how silence can sound like thunder when guilt starts to echo. Carson started to notice something was wrong when his corporate credit card declined at a business lunch. He called me, confused, almost panicked. Bella, did you do something to the accounts? What do you mean? I asked, voice sweet as honey. The joint account. It's frozen. Oh, I said lightly. The bank called about suspicious activity, fraudulent withdrawals. I figured you'd want me to protect our assets while they investigate. Silence on the other end. They said it might take a few weeks, I continued. You know how these things are. Red tape. I could hear him breathing. Bella. I have to go, honey. Dinner's almost ready. Love you. I hung up and smiled. That night, Lydia called him 17 times. I know because the recorder picked up every single one. What do you mean the accounts are frozen? How am I supposed to pay for the renovations? Carson, you promised this would be easy. His voice panicked now. I'll fix it. Just give me a few days. But he couldn't fix it, because every day, I was 3 steps ahead. I revoked his access to the Riverside property, changed the locks on our house, opened a new bank account in my name only, and moved every penny I'd earned in the last 6 months. Rachel filed preliminary divorce papers not to serve him yet, just to have them ready. Marcus compiled everything into a dossier that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. And I started making plans for Carson's corporate charity gala. The one happening in 2 weeks. The one where every major client, investor, and business partner in the tri-state area would be watching. The one where Carson was receiving an award for ethical business leadership. They taught me that love meant giving. Today, I'm teaching myself that love can also mean stopping. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by evidence, legal documents, and a carefully crafted plan. For the first time in 22 years, I wasn't waiting for Carson to come home. I was waiting for the perfect moment to make sure he never could. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Witness confirmed. Lydia's ex-boyfriend willing to testify about the fraud scheme. We have everything we need. I looked up at the ceiling, where Carson was pacing in his office, probably trying to figure out why his entire financial empire was crumbling. And I smiled. For the first time, I didn't need them to hear me. My silence had already spoken. Now it was time to make them listen. The grand ballroom at the Street Regis was everything Carson loved, expensive, impressive, full of people who mattered. 300 guests in evening wear, crystal chandeliers, a 20-piece orchestra. The who's who of New York construction and real estate, all gathered to celebrate Carson Mitchell receiving the Ethical Business Leadership Award. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I stood at the back entrance, watching Carson on stage through the half-open door. He was mid-speech, confident and charming, talking about family values and the foundation of trust that makes great businesses possible. Lydia sat at the VIP table, front and center, wearing a diamond bracelet that cost $8,000. I knew because I'd seen the receipt in Carson's office drawer. Bought with money he'd stolen from our joint account. Rachel stood beside me, holding a leather folder. Marcus was on my other side, solid and steady. "You ready?" Marcus asked quietly. I took a breath. I've been ready for 22 years, I just didn't know it. I walked into that ballroom with my head high, my heels clicking against marble like a countdown. People turned to look. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Carson saw me and froze mid-sentence, the smile dying on his face. "Honey," he said into the microphone, voice strained. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I just kept walking toward the stage, Rachel and Marcus flanking me like an honor guard. "Isabella, this isn't the time." I climbed the stairs, reached for the microphone. He held onto it. "Bella, please." "Let go of the microphone, Carson." Something in my voice made him release it. The room was dead silent. I turned to face 300 people who'd watched Carson build his empire, people who'd congratulated him on his success, people who had no idea what it had cost. "My name is Isabella Mitchell," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I've been Carson's wife for 22 years. And tonight, I'm here to tell you the truth about the man you just honored." Carson's face went white. "Isabella, you're not well." "I'm perfectly well," I cut him off. "In fact, I've never seen things more clearly." I nodded to Marcus. He hit play on the portable speaker we'd set up. Carson's voice filled the ballroom, tinny but unmistakable. "Isabella? She's the old burden, dead weight. But she signed everything over years ago. Too trusting. Too stupid to ask questions." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lydia's voice next. "When will you be free of her?" "Carson, soon. The lawyer's finalizing the power of attorney petition. Once that goes through, I control everything. Then the divorce, and she'll never see a penny." I watched the color drain from faces across the room. Saw hands cover mouths. Saw people turn to stare at Carson, then at Lydia, who was trying to sink into her chair. I stopped the recording. "That conversation was recorded 6 days ago," I said, "but the betrayal started long before that." I pulled out documents, held them up. Forged signatures on property transfers. My father's inheritance worth over $500,000 stolen and used as collateral for a company I never knew existed. Bank statements showing systematic theft from our joint accounts over 18 months. And a petition to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could legally control everything I own. Carson lunged for the microphone. "That's taken out of context." Security was there in seconds, holding him back. "There's no context," I said, "that makes fraud acceptable." Rachel stepped forward, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "As of this morning, criminal fraud charges have been filed with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. All assets connected to Carson Mitchell and Lydia Chen are frozen pending investigation. And 1 hour ago, Mitchell Construction's board of directors held an emergency vote." She paused. "Carson Mitchell has been removed as CEO, effective immediately." The room erupted. Carson was screaming now, struggling against security. Lydia had her face in her hands, sobbing. But I wasn't watching them anymore. I was watching the faces in the crowd. The shock, the disgust, the slow dawning of understanding. These people had celebrated a thief, had honored a man who'd built his empire on his wife's inheritance and called her stupid for trusting him. I set the microphone down gently on the podium. "For 22 years," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying, "I believed that love meant sacrifice, that marriage meant trust, that family meant forever." I looked at Carson. Really looked at him. "You taught me I was wrong. So thank you. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to stop." I walked off that stage with Rachel and Marcus beside me. Behind me, I heard Carson shouting my name, heard Lydia screaming, heard the chaos of 300 people who'd just watched a man's world collapse in real time. But I didn't turn around. I walked through that ballroom, past the crystal and gold, past the people in their expensive clothes, past the life I'd spent 22 years building for someone who'd never valued it. And when I stepped out into the cold November night, I realized something. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely alone. And I'd never felt more free. After the verdict, silence became my favorite sound. It was the sound of justice finally breathing. I didn't stay to watch the rest of the gala collapse. I'd said what I needed to say, done what I needed to do. The rest would unfold exactly as it should, with or without me there to witness it. Rachel drove me home. We didn't talk, didn't need to. When I walked into my house now, Legally and completely, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. My phone started buzzing around midnight. Text messages, voicemails, all from Carson. "Bella, please, we need to talk. You don't understand what you've done. I can fix this. Just answer the phone." I deleted them without reading past the first line. The news broke the next morning, not because I'd called reporters I hadn't. But 300 people had witnessed Carson's fall, and in New York, that kind of spectacle doesn't stay quiet for long. Prominent contractor removed amid fraud allegations. CEO accused of forging wife's signature to steal inheritance. Mitchell Construction Board calls emergency investigation. I read the articles over coffee, feeling nothing but a strange, distant calm. Marcus called that afternoon. "NYPD wants to interview you next week. Fraud division. They're building a case." "I'll be there," I said. "How are you holding up?" I looked around my quiet house. The morning light coming through clean windows, the absence of Carson's clutter, his mess, his lies. "I'm okay," I said. And I meant it. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched their world crumble from a distance. Lydia was the first to fall apart publicly. Someone had photographed her being escorted out of the penthouse by building security, crying, clutching a single suitcase. The diamond bracelet had been confiscated as evidence stolen property purchased with fraudulent funds. She tried to return to her old apartment, but her roommates had rented out her room. She posted on social media about misunderstandings and being used, but the comments section was brutal. "You called yourself his wife while his real wife was working double shifts to pay for his dreams. Karma is a mirror." Within a week, her Instagram was deleted. Carson lasted longer, but not by much. Mitchell Construction's board launched a full audit. What they found made the initial fraud charges look like parking tickets, embezzlement, tax evasion, falsified contracts. He'd been running the company like his personal piggy bank for years. They fired him formally on a Tuesday. By Thursday, 3 major clients had pulled their contracts. By the following Monday, the company filed for bankruptcy protection. I heard through Marcus that Carson tried to get a loan using the penthouse as collateral, forgetting, apparently, that it was no longer in his name. That it had been legally returned to me the day after the gala, along with every other asset he'd stolen. The bank denied him. His truck got repossessed 2 weeks later. I didn't celebrate these things, didn't even feel particularly satisfied. It was more like watching a building you'd always known was structurally unsound finally collapse under its own weight. Inevitable, mathematical, just. I didn't need to ruin them. Their lies had already done that. One afternoon I saw them together, Carson and Lydia, arguing outside a diner in Queens. I was driving past, heading to a meeting with my lawyer about the final divorce settlement. They looked small, tired. Lydia was crying. Carson was gesturing wildly, his face red. They used to whisper that I'd lost my mind. Now they avoid their own reflections. I drove past without slowing down. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks after the gala. Carson didn't contest anything, couldn't afford to, not with criminal charges pending and no income. I got the house, the Riverside property, every penny he'd stolen, returned with interest as part of the restitution order. He got a court date and a public defender. Rachel called it the cleanest divorce I've ever handled. I called it closing a chapter I should have finished years ago. My daughter called me the day the divorce was final. We hadn't spoken much during the marriage. Carson had always made holidays awkward, made my relationship with the kids about him somehow. "Mom," she said, her voice quiet, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." "You weren't supposed to," I said. "That's how people like your father work. They make you doubt what you're seeing. Are you okay?" I looked around my living room. I'd redecorated. New paint, new furniture. Everything that reminded me of him was gone, donated, sold, or sitting in a landfill somewhere. "I'm better than okay," I said. "I'm free. Some debts don't need to be collected. Life has its own way of balancing the books. I learned that you don't need to chase revenge when you've armed yourself with truth. You don't need to destroy people who've already destroyed themselves. You just need to step aside and let consequence do what consequence does best. And then most importantly, you need to walk away. Not in anger, not in bitterness. Just walk away, into the life you should have been living all along. The one where you're not invisible. The one where your silence isn't weakness but choice. The one where you finally belong to yourself. After the noise fades, what's left isn't victory, it's understanding. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I moved into a small apartment overlooking the Hudson River. It wasn't the penthouse Carson had stolen. I'd sold that property and used the money to start fresh. This place was mine, completely, legally, morally mine. 1 bedroom. Hardwood floors. A balcony just big enough for a chair and a small table. In the mornings, I'd sit out there with coffee and watch the sun turn the river gold. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in years. I went back to nursing, but only part-time. Hospice care at a facility in Brooklyn. It wasn't glamorous work. Nothing about watching people die ever is, but it mattered. And I'd forgotten, somewhere in those 22 years with Carson, what it felt like to do work that mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with money. Mrs. Chen, one of my patients, asked me one afternoon why I'd chosen hospice. Because, I said, adjusting her pillows, I spent a long time learning what it looks like when something dies slowly. I wanted to learn how to help people do it with dignity. She smiled. You're talking about more than nursing, aren't you? Maybe, I said. She squeezed my hand. Good for you, honey. Good for you. I joined a book club, went to yoga classes on Thursday mornings, started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. The paintings weren't good, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was doing something because I wanted to, not because someone else needed me to. Marcus came by one Saturday with takeout and beer. We sat on my balcony, watching boats slide past on the river, and he asked the question I'd been asking myself for weeks. Do you regret any of it? The marriage, I mean. All those years. I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. I regret that he wasted them. But I can't regret who I was. I loved honestly. I gave generously. I trusted completely. Those aren't flaws, Marcus. Those are just parts of being human. Even when people take advantage? Especially then. I took a sip of beer. Because the alternative is becoming someone who doesn't trust anyone, who doesn't give anything, who goes through life so protected they forget what warmth feels like. So what's the lesson? Marcus asked. Love harder? Love smarter? I smiled. Love with boundaries. Love without forgetting that you matter too. Justice isn't about watching them fall. It's about standing again without hate. I used to believe love meant giving everything. Now I know love also means knowing when to stop. That night, after Marcus left, I stood on my balcony and did something I hadn't done since the divorce. I talked to Carson. Not the real Carson, he was somewhere in Queens, living in a studio apartment and working construction again, trying to rebuild a reputation that would never fully recover. But the version of Carson I'd loved, the one I'd believed in. I forgive you, I said to the empty air, not because you deserve it, not because what you did was okay, but because carrying anger around is like drinking poison and waiting for you to die. The wind picked up, ruffling my hair. I forgive you so I can be free, so I can sleep at night without your voice in my head, so I can love again someday without flinching every time someone gets too close. I close my eyes, and I forgive myself. For not seeing it sooner, for making excuses, for believing that if I just loved you better, harder, more completely, you'd finally see my worth. My voice cracked. You never deserved me, Carson, and it took me 22 years to realize that wasn't my failure, it was yours. I went back inside, closed the balcony door, and sat on my couch in the quiet. For the first time in decades, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. If my story teaches anything, it's this. Kindness without boundaries isn't love, it's surrender. I learned that you can give someone everything and still not be enough for them. Not because you're lacking, but because they're looking for something you were never meant to provide. I learned that some people will take and take and take, and when you finally stop giving, they'll call you selfish. I learned that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just you, in a small apartment, drinking coffee and realizing you don't need anyone's permission to be happy anymore. The greatest revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding. It's waking up one day and realizing you're not thinking about them anymore. That you're not angry, not bitter, not even sad. You're just living. Fully. Honestly. On your own terms. A few weeks later, my daughter came to visit. We cooked dinner together, something we hadn't done since she was in high school. She asked me if I was lonely. Sometimes, I admitted. But lonely isn't the same as empty. I'm learning the difference. Do you think you'll date again? I laughed. Maybe, someday. When I meet someone who sees me, really sees me, and doesn't immediately start calculating what I can do for them. You deserve that, Mom. I know, I said. And I meant it. If you've ever lost yourself trying to love someone who only saw your worth in numbers, I hope my story reminds you, it's never too late to choose yourself. Thank you for keeping these stories alive, stories where justice doesn't shout, it heals. That night, I stood on my balcony one more time, watching the city lights reflect off the water. Justice gave me back my name. But peace gave me back myself. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything Carson could ever have stolen.